Okay, thank you so much for joining. I guess I'm gonna go ahead and start. Um, on behalf of the Resident Fellow section of the Radiological Society of Connecticut, I welcome you all to tonight's event. We wanted to have this session to talk a little bit about radiology job markets and how to uh, how to start thinking about finding jobs after finishing training and what items to think about and look for when we start thinking about it. This event is organized by the Resident Fellow section, and this is one of the sessions that we plan as part of these activities that we plan for this year for the trainees in the state of Connecticut. Next slide, please. So the Resident Fellow section of this Radiological Society of Connecticut is the trainees section of the chapter, the ACR chapter of our state. It's basically is managed completely by the trainees, and it was established in 2019. As you can see in the picture, it was in October of 2019 when we initially launched our chapter, our RFS chapter, and during the semi-annual meeting of the ACR chapter in our state. This is the face sheet of our executive council, our current council. My name is Faiza Sadegari. I'm the president, and I'm the PGY5 R4 resident at Yale. And Jade Anderson is our secretary treasurer. She is an R4 resident at Norwalk. Unfortunately, she is unable to join us tonight because she's at a meeting and actually right now is in a flight. But she has been involved in organizing this meeting, and I was very excited about this meeting. We have Dr. Ashwin Deshmo. He's going to talk to you a little bit later. He's our education officer, and he is a PGY 3R2 resident at Bridgeport Hospital. And he was the main coordinator and organizer of this event for tonight. And we have Shamit Rahman. He is PGY 2 IRDR resident, so first year IRDR resident at Yale, and he's our communication officer and the face behind our social media platforms. And Riddhi Borse, she is our membership liaison, and she's in charge of being in touch with other trainees in other programs and to recruit other trainees interested in getting involved with the RFS. And we have Ryan Bahar. He is our medical student liaison. He's a second-year medical student at Yale School of Medicine, and we hope that we can have more medical students engaged in our programs and activities, and specifically geared towards students. We recently started an initiative to have liaisons from different residency programs. So far, we have liaisons nominated from Bridgeport Hospital, Dr. Hajar Mahmood. She's here tonight with us as well. She is an RO resident at Bridgeport, and Dr. Hussein from St. Vincent Hospital, and Dr. Robinson from Hartford Hospital. If you're from a program that doesn't have a liaison yet, please reach out to your program director or us and chiefs, your chiefs, and then us to nominate our 1 or R2 residents to be a liaison between us and to improve collaborations between us and your program so we can have more trainees involved. And we're very excited to have this team as part of the RFS section. Next slide, please. Ever since we started our activities, we had some virtual events in 2020 and 2021 for regarding COVID and changes in educational activities, and also another seminar and annual meeting for different audiences for different residency classes with a focus in fellowship applications, preparing for calls, sharing educational resources. And we also had some in-person events. Next slide, please. And recently, with improving COVID status, we got to participate in the young physician section of the chapter and had a happy hour. And we got to meet some of our friends in other programs, and it was a great event. And we were able to actually meet for the first time as part of this executive council. We had our in-person meeting a couple of weeks ago. So next slide, please. So we're excited to resume all these in-person activities. And as part of our plan is to plan more collaboration between programs and have more educational activities. Next, please. I just mentioned, so there are lots of events and programs that we're planning. So if you have interest or any ideas, please reach out and be involved. Next, please. And if you're interested, there is this application form you can fill out, and we'll share the link as well if you're interested to be more involved. Thank you. Next. And these are some other links to get involved. We have Twitter account. We're in the process of establishing our Instagram account, and some of the links are the website and Facebook page and other communication means for the RSC, Radiological Society of Connecticut. We'll share all these in an email, a follow-up email. Next slide, please. So I'm excited to invite you all to start this event, actually. And we are privileged and honored to have great guests tonight who accepted to share their time and expertise with us to talk about radiology job search. So I will ask Dr. Ashwin Deshmukh to give us more information about it. And thank you all for joining us tonight.
Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to all the panelists and the audience. We are going to begin with a short sort of talks by all the panelists, and this will be followed by a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box, or else you could ask them towards the end of the individual talks. With that, we would like to introduce Dr. Sam Pabvash as our first panelist speaker. Dr. Pabvash, if you could turn your video on if you can.
Hey, I guess my video is on. Hey, everyone. Yes, thanks to Faize and Ashwin for organizing this meeting. I'm glad to be here. I'm a neuroradiologist and neuroimaging clinician scientist. I'm attending at Yale, an assistant professor. I joined Yale after doing the 2-year fellowship at UCSF in June of 2018, and I've been there since. Before that, again, as part of the 2-year fellowship, I was a clinical instructor at UCSF and did my residency at University of Minnesota as part of a categorical program. And I'm glad to be here and answer questions. Now, actually, you send us like a series of questions to go through. Do you want me to go through them right now, or would you could just go ahead and introduce everyone?
So yeah, the way we are planning to do this was every panelist would speak for about 10 minutes about their journey and their choices that they made along the journey. And then the questions that I sent would typically be for the discussion towards the end. But if you have anything to say that sort of also includes the questions, that's okay as well. And I will introduce like each panelist one by one after their individual sort of talks.
Sure. So yeah, basically, very briefly said, like it's my journey from residency to fellowship and then attending. Like I have been drawn to a research career from very beginning, from med school, and I did continue doing research during residency and then fellowship. The path that I'm taking is a little bit unorthodox. I can go over, like all the paths that you can take in academic career. I have a research heavy career. So, and for that, I basically have, right now I'm PI on 3 different grants, and including one NIH grant, and have substantial academic time. So the way it works is that you basically have to sponsor your own time, basically bring in money and buy out your time from the department to pay for your own salary to be able to, basically have really some of your time for research. And then in addition, you also have to have set aside some money to run a research group or research lab. My research is mostly technical, image analysis, and more recently machine learning and AI. So I do not have a wet lab, but we do also have attendings who run a wet lab. But my research is mostly translational, and in next step I will be like recruiting patients and imaging them, testing new imaging methods and or new image analysis techniques. It's actually quite uncommon, unfortunately, these days to have that. And we can go over more details about the different types of academic career that you can have, how you can get more research time. In terms of the overall employment in academic career. So basically the most common type of the academic career these days is similar to what at Yale they call it clinical educator. So your main role will be to teach and have some academic production, such as publishing papers or submitting abstracts, and pretty much the standard is to get like 20% academic time. Having said that, more and more institutes are now opening up a clinical only spots. Many places I know, like from Yale to Mass General to NYU, there are now attendings who are being hired to basically do all the clinical work. In the amount of roughly the percentage academic time that you get is 5% as a rule of thumb with this position. And the expectation for teaching and academic production is basically minimal. It's pretty much like a private practice, except that you're working in a more clean academic setting. So you're hired by academic program. The other basically pillar of academic jobs will be education. That is a more organized way. So it is above and beyond what is expected from people who are like just like a staffing out residents or something like that. And this is when people become, for example, program director And depending on the size of the program, some people may get like more time. So the larger the program, the more time that you will have to be dedicated for dealing with GME requirement. And so and then we do have people who are in charge of education of residents. Aside from it, there are usually vice chair or associate chair of education, which is perhaps more involved in day-to-day work of the residents. There are usually, for bigger programs who are associated with a medical school, there are also people who are in charge of education of the medical students who rotate through radiology. These are the established positions that you can find in different programs. Again, depending on the size of the program and the med school that is associated with it, the number of the positions and the time that is allocated for these, which is, is saved by the chair for each one of these positions, can be different. So like the bigger the program, there are more people. You may have fellowship program director, you may have associate program director, and also people who are like have specific titles for training of the medical students. And then finally, there is administrative component of academic jobs, which are people who are chair, vice chair, those who are in charge of quality improvement, clinical affairs, section chiefs, and so on and so forth. So those are like basically running day-to-day clinical program, and they get some time off. Anyway, and then the very rare form is probably the one that I took, which is research heavy, which is pretty much somewhere in between MD and PhD, where you have to bring in grants and then run a lab. So this is, I just wanted to, like use that 10 minutes to describe the 4 different pathways that these days we have in academic radiology. And then we can go over about, the other questions that you posted, like ideal time later after we introduce other people.
Sure, certainly. Our next panelist is, thank you very much for the information. Our next panelist is Dr. Adam Kay. Dr. Kay is a partner and radiologist at Advanced Radiology, consultants based out of Bridgeport, Connecticut. He attended the Yale University School of Medicine, where he completed a dual degree MD-MBA program with the School of Management. He completed his residency at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, and where he also stayed for fellowships in imaging informatics and oncologic imaging. He specializes in cancer imaging, including MRI and PET-CT, and is dual board certified with American Board of Radiology, as well as American Board of Nuclear Medicine. He also holds additional board certification with the American Board of Imaging Informatics. Dr. Kay lives with his family in Fairfield, Connecticut, and his hobbies include playing music and attending live concerts and watching sports, that is football and baseball.
Thanks, Ashwin. You're looking slick. I'm not used to seeing you without scrubs. You're looking slick. I like it. Good look.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashwin. I do have slides. There's nothing really too special about them, so I can put them up. I can share them. Just share screen. Oh, disabled screen sharing. All right, I can just talk. That's okay. There's really nothing interesting or.
I gave you access. You should be able to share screen.
Let's do that. Share and slideshow. All right. So I took this as, you want me to talk about how I got to where I am and sort of the decisions I made along the way. Ashwin did a good job describing, how I got here. As you notice that I'm now in private practice, but I trained almost, pretty much only in sort of larger academic places. I came right out of medical school, Yale. I knew medicine. I didn't really want to sort of waste time. So I didn't do a gap year research here like that. Not that those are wastes of time for me. And, you know, what I wanted to do, I wanted to get on the road pretty quick. My third year of medicine and med schools, I decided I wanted to go into radiology. I liked surgery, particularly plastics and ortho a little bit, but I didn't really want the surgeon's life. I like ophthalmology, but I ended up deciding that I did an internship sub-I, and ended up deciding that the one organ was not my jam, and I wanted to sort of branch out and do more general, learn about the whole body. So I did this MD MBA program, which I can talk a little bit about. I always in undergrad, I was an economics major. I loved the economics and medicine. And one of my mentors that I'm sure many of you who train at Yale know how he formed is the chair. He had the MBA program, kind of talked me into it. I had a great, probably may have gotten a little more out of it if I had gone back after having some sort of work experience or even residency experience. But I did learn, I met some amazing people, taught me sort of the language of business and how I can speak with people outside of people in medicine. And then went to Philly, did my residency at UPenn, where I stayed for my fellowship. And besides why I chose that, besides being an excellent program, Philly was just a nice compromise for me and my wife in terms of where we wanted to. But she was then my fiance, where we wanted to live. She was coming from New York City, I was coming from New Haven, so I wanted a bigger city, she wanted a smaller city, and Philly was this kind of perfect compromise. So every step along the way, I like to talk about every step along the way, your decision when you're in undergrad and med school, and you're on this journey to being a doctor, each step of the way becomes a little less of, what abs rank, and a little bit more about. So that led to me applying to jobs, and I basically exclusively applied in Connecticut. Both my family, my wife's family were here. We wanted to stay. We family, we wanted the grandparents around. So I was fairly geographically limited. I applied during fourth year, which is becoming much more common now. But back when I applied, which I'm sounding like I'm old. This is just I started in 2015. So 2013, 2014, really most people were waiting till fellow year to look for jobs. And not that that's not, you can't do that now, but from what I've noticed, that I think it seems like people are starting, at least talking with our residents, that a lot of them are looking for jobs, even during their fourth year, which is how I did it. It was a little rare back then. I knew about, advanced radiology through, many of you know my dad. My dad worked there. He's retired now, but so I actually approached them about a job. But it's important to, I could tell you all you want to hear about how I did it, but it's a much different market now than it was back then. Back then, there were really no jobs available. Starting salaries were a lot lower. After the recession in 2007, 2008, a lot of the older radiologists were still working even by 2013, and there were a lot less job openings. So that didn't really start to change until a couple years later. It started to change a little bit, that the market opened up, and then COVID kind of changed everything, as a whole bunch of people retired all at once. In terms of private practice versus academics, I can talk about 2 offers in Connecticut, and I chose the one that was closest to my family, and basically was in the place that my wife and I wanted to live. So in terms of why I chose private practice. So some people say, oh, well, he did an MBA, he must want to be in private practice, right? And that's not really true. Plenty of my classmates in the MD MBA program went on to academic jobs, research jobs. And I look at it, the MBA was not about learning about making money or learning about, how to be CEO. It's more about a framework. It was learning a different framework for thinking about the world, and a different framework for thinking about leadership. Leadership applies everywhere. It applies in private practice, academics, hybrid jobs, really anywhere. My residency certainly pushed a lot of us to try to go into academics. They had a whole program called literally how to be an academic radiologist, where they during our first year, where they talk about research and job structures that you just heard about, and the various aspects of radiology outside of the day-to-day interpretation that go into academics. But for me, even from like my days in undergrad, I never really liked doing research that much, and I never wanted my job progression to be based on how I was everything out, because that was a pressure on me that I didn't want to deal with. Now, also, as you just heard, there are other tracks in academics, and there's clinical tracks. But for me, another big part of it was that I wanted a sense of ownership of my practice and really of my life. I wanted to I wanted to have ownership of something beyond just professional reimbursement or how I get through my day to day. I wanted something where I had an ownership stake in, and the stakes were a little higher. It's actually becoming rarer and rarer to find practices like that now that own their own technical side, the technical side of things, that are maybe own their own offices, own their own scanners, employ their own staff, things like that. And a lot of that has to do with how groups are merging into these large super groups, corporate groups, private equity groups are buying out, and there's just not as much as, despite what I don't know if there's anybody here that's going to talk to you about that stuff, but so they tell you there's just not as much opportunity for really having equity and feeling a piece of ownership of things that do. That stuff.
I'm sorry for interrupting, Dr. K. I think we are losing your audio. I think sometimes
moving to Fairfield. I started at AdRad. We had a. Hello, can you hear me? No.
Yeah, it's sort of getting interrupted. It might help if you turn your video off, because sometimes that works if the connection is not too strong.
I can turn the video off. How's that? Hello?
Yes. We are able to hear you for now.
You're able to hear me for now?
Yep.
All right, good. All right, I'll keep going. So I was talking about, so we ended up moving to Fairfield. We ended up where I live now. And, I have a good life. I work, it's hard work. I work during the week. I work 1 to 2 weekends a month, about that. We have the opportunity to do a little more for if you want some extra pay. I work hard and I have some time with my family. My days are pretty consistent. 6:30, but most days I'm home 5:30. About 5:36, and I get to spend time with. Sometimes you have to stay later for call shifts. Sometimes you have to go in earlier for an early shift. Or for a tumor board, things like that. It's variable depending on who you are, what you're covering. But the days get very hard. And I know that there was questions that I don't really. We can get into that later in the question part, but we don't really measure them. But it's hard work. And the way you get through it is you remember you're a doctor. You went into this for a reason, and part of being a doctor is some element of sacrifice of your own time, your own time, some element of sacrifice of time with your family for your patients. And whether that's in private practice, if you're literally if you're sacrificing some of your time to do research, if you're in academics, whatever it is, you have to think about your career in that way.
Sorry, we lost you again.
And element sacrifice. Do you want me to call in, Ashwin? Can you hear me? I'm going to call in my cell. Give me 2 seconds.
Okay, sure.
Can you hear me now? While I try to do it.
Yeah,
I'm basically almost done. I can talk about how much vacation what some of the trade-offs are in private practice if you want. I'm just trying to find the link and what email will show me the money, right?
Yes.
Anyway, that's where I am. So, I was going to talk about, an example about some of the sacrifices you make, and how we staff and how we hire people and how we, but I'm running up and you're starting to lose my internet connection here. Negotiations. I think Dr. Han's going to probably do a great job on much time on that. I probably underestimated some of the leverage I had. It's not really a problem now. Look, I do very well. I'm happy with. Like I said, when I came in, and I also was coming into a place that wasn't even necessarily, they were creating a position. So it wasn't like I had a lot of leverage to say, well, if you don't give me this, I'm going to walk. Enjoy yourself, and I hope your life turns out well at the other place. So I maybe didn't negotiate as much as I probably could have. But like I said, things are much different now. Starting pay is higher. You guys have you're going to have a lot more leverage because a lot across the country, and yeah, that's it. That's all I had for you. And again, I'm happy to take questions, and we can talk about whatever anybody wants to talk about. So.
Sure, certainly. Thank you very much, Dr. K, for all the information. Our next panelist is Dr. Sarvinas Porjabar. She's a neuroradiologist at Radiology Associates of Florida. She completed her radiology residency and fellowship at Yale New Haven Hospital, Yale School of Medicine. During residency, she also served on the RFS Executive Committee of ACR and the Radiological Society of Connecticut.
Thank you. So I'll keep my video turned off, but if I can share my screen, it would be helpful. Okay. Okay, so hi everyone, hope you're doing well. I haven't seen many of you in a while. So I'm going to talk about teleradiology. That's the job I selected to do, and I'm very happy with my choice so far. As you mentioned, I'm a neuroradiologist by training. Currently, I'm doing ER radiology job for private practice in Florida, and I live in California, so I'm doing teleradiology. To give you a quick background, I started looking for jobs during my fellowship. I started in September. That was around the time that my co-fellows also started looking for jobs. And it took a while for me to realize what I exactly want. When I started looking, I looked for private practices in Los Angeles area because that was the place we were planning to leave. But then I changed my mind. So I ended up changing the direction of my job search. And finally in February, around this time last year, I signed my contract. So it takes a while, and it's never really early to start looking for jobs. And also it depends on the area that you want to look for a job. If you're going from East Coast to West Coast, then you definitely want to start a little bit earlier. Although West Coast people tend to post jobs later, but it's always good to know ahead of time. If you have links, definitely you need to use them. You can talk to people that you know, you're like seniors from fellowship, from residency, or even attendings. There are attendings who were like at our program who left for California, and they helped me too. Or like one of my attendings started like emailing their friends in San Diego. That was one of the places I was looking for jobs. So it's always helpful to use your connections. I mainly use ACR website. I know some of the societies also post jobs on their website, like Abdominal Radiology, Society of Abdominal Radiology. I didn't use any of those. I just went with ACR. And as I mentioned, I just talked to my attendings and some of the fellows. like old fellows at Yale. So that's about the timing to look for a job. As I mentioned, I started to look for private practices, but I had a couple of friends in LA area that they told me it's best to pick a job close to where I'm supposed to live because the traffic is very bad here. And sometimes it takes them up to an hour and a half to drive 15 miles and get home. So they told me it's very important to be close to where I want to work. So I started looking for private practice job, but I soon realized that the practices, the hospitals and the outpatient centers that they serve are spread throughout the town. So no matter what, you need to start driving at some point. And some of them were offering hybrid on-site and like 1 or 2 days tele, like read from home. But again, that was one kind of negative point for me to join a private practice in a busy like city with heavy traffic. The other thing was that I was not sure if we stay in LA after a year, and I didn't want to start looking for a new job like 6 months after I start my job already. So I didn't want to be physically bound to one area. So those were the main reasons that I changed my mind and started looking for teleradiology jobs. And the other big reason for me was that I have a 2-year-old and I had some like childcare issues during fellowship. I had to work from home a couple of days. So after that, I realized that it's a very good, I would say it's a very good opportunity to be able to work from home, because if I get childcare issue, I can still be home. Even if I have a new nanny, I can still supervise. So that was another reason that I started looking for teleradiology job. So far I have been very happy. I'll talk about pros and cons and the current market, and then we'll have Q&A. So I think I talked about it. There are some private practices that also offer on-site, like they offer hybrid jobs. So you can do a couple of days, or you can do your calls from home and then go on-site for other days, or when there's a procedure scheduled. So regarding the telejob market, when I started last year, they were mostly large companies. I think you probably heard about Rad Partners. That's one of the big companies these days. Mostly large companies were offering telejob, but looking at the job market this year, there are many small groups who started like hiring teleradiologists. And I think COVID was kind of helpful, like was a blessing in disguise for telejobs, because the practices had to expand their bandwidth and like work on the infrastructures for teleradiology reads. So now they're more towards doing, like they're more, I would say they're more ready or more prepared to offer telejobs compared to before COVID era. So how does tele works? Basically, I have a big workstation at home. They'll send it to you. I mean, most of the practice, they'll send it to you. There are a few who don't. And you will have a list that you read from. It's like exactly like what we used to do in training program. And most of them, they have RV requirements that you need to fulfill. And you'll have people online, like when I'm online, I can see at least like 50 radiologists online. Usually their subspecialties written in front of them. I know some of them. I don't know many of them. So basically they're online. If I have a question, which like happened to me a couple of times, I just find the subspecialty that I like to talk and I send them a link and ask my question. Rad Partners offer a core team. That's basically, I think there are some of them are radiology assistants or RAs who are sitting somewhere, and they facilitate the communication with the provider. So if basically I want to communicate result, I'll just leave a note for them, and either they will communicate or they'll connect me to the provider based on the finding. And if I want to talk to them directly or not. They also look at the workflow. If there are work lists that they have studies that are like past the time, the appropriate timing, they'll just like text us or like assign cases to us like to read next. So basically they do the workflow management, and they have a very, very strong IT team. So like any time of the day that I have any type of problems, I just give them a call. They put the big numbers on my monitor so I can just call them immediately, and they're very good with what they do. So pros of teleradiology job. First of all, it saves a huge amount of time. I don't necessarily need to do my morning routines before doing my job. I don't need to commute. So like basically you spend zero time on getting prepared, and you spend zero time on driving. Of course, you save on gas, coffee, clothing, anything that you need when you're going on site. You're home, you can supervise, like I'm home, I can hear, like, although I'm in my office and I don't go out when I'm working, but I can hear. So sometimes I just keep texting my nanny and telling her what to do and what not to do, which I think it's much better than being on my phone and like checking the camera all the time. That's what I used to do when I was fellow. You can eat homemade healthy food or whatever you find in the fridge. And if you are an independent contractor, which I think we're going to talk about it later today, then you can write off for your home office and like save on your taxes. So cons, I would say that I really miss being in reading room and like chatting with people. Yes, you concentrate more. You don't have interruptions. You don't get phone calls. You don't have providers just walking in like with 10 other trainees and people who like ask different type of questions. But I sometimes miss being in this atmosphere, like having it, and I'm alone in my office all the time. You wouldn't make new friends. I've been in LA for like 8-9 months now, and I just have my old friends. I don't have any friends from work. I talk to them online, but like you can be friends. And most of the tele jobs, especially last year, they were after hours. So they were like 7 on, 7 off, or 7 on, 14 off jobs. They usually start after 5 p.m. Because I'm living on West Coast, it's like easier for me to get a tele on the East Coast because of the 3 hours difference. But this year when I was looking at job market, now private practices started offering daytime jobs, like starting from 8 a.m. Central Time or Eastern Time. And there are also some options for like 7 on, 14 off, which are basically overnight. Like they start at, I think, midnight or 1 a.m. till 7 or 8 a.m. And then you'll get 14 days off. Okay, what I wanted to add, I think, is that when I first started doing 7 on, 7 off, I was very excited about it because I thought I'm just working half of the year and I get a full salary and I have like half of the year off. I would say still it's really good, but it depends on your life situation. When you work 7 on, 7 off, you miss half of the weekends of the year. So you miss many family events. After working like 3-4 months, I thought that it's not the best option for me personally, because first of all, you're working in the afternoon. So if your kid goes to like daycare during the day, you wouldn't see them in the afternoon, and then you're not going to spend half of the weekends with them. And as I mentioned, you miss many events. But if you don't have kids and your like significant other is okay with this schedule, I would say it's really good because you don't need to get vacation to do what you want to do. You can just work 7 days and then travel for the other 7 days that you have off. So current market, this year market was much, much better than last year. As I mentioned, last year, only big companies were offering tele. Now, I talked to small private practices that started offering tele positions. So now you have more options, and now you have daytime tele jobs. which that's what I'm going to do next year. I'm basically changing my job to daytime job. There are academic like hospitals that are offering telemarket. I saw UPMC ads, NYU, Utah, Colorado. And one of my co-fellows actually, she is doing like an off, like after 5 p.m. off hours tele job, and she has residents. And I talked to her, she was like very comfortable with what she's doing. Like she's on the phone with her residents all the time, and she was happy about it. And okay, yes. Oh, and now there are some private practices that are offering in underserved area. They also started offering tele positions. So last year when I was looking for jobs, I remember there was a job somewhere in Louisiana, like a very small town, and they were offering like a huge amount of money with a huge amount of sign-on bonus. And I was like, wow, like some and it was like, wow, some lucky people can take this job. I cannot, because like I was moving to LA. But interestingly, after 3 months, the job was still not taken. So they were still posting and posting. So now those type of practices who basically don't have any applicants, they started doing tele because now they can have more applicants if they offer tele positions. So that's all I wanted to tell you about my experience.
Thank you very much for the information. Our next panelist is Dr. Kavi Devulapalli. He's an interventional radiologist with experience in a variety of minimally invasive treatments pertaining to chronic deep venous thrombosis, superficial varicose veins, pelvic congestion, varicoceles, peripheral arterial disease, uterine fibroid embolization, and vertebral augmentation. And he's one of the few specialists nationally with experience in creating a high volume prostate artery embolization in an OBL setting. He graduated from Rice University. Subsequently, he underwent a combined medical and master's in public health program from Case Western Reserve University. He then completed a diagnostic radiology residency at UCSF, followed by a fellowship in vascular and interventional radiology at University of North Carolina.
Great. Could you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks a lot, Ashwin. I really appreciate it. It's awesome to be with you guys. I really wish I had something like this back when I was looking for a job. I've had quite the journey. It's been great hearing all the other panelists. I think they've had some excellent information. I've experienced a lot of different practice settings, even though I'm here to mostly talk to you about locums. I've kind of seen it all at this point. I've only been doing this for about 4 years. So, you know, as Ashwin said, I've kind of been coast to coast with my training, originally in California and then moving to North Carolina. Really, and a lot of what you guys will be doing is trying to align with your spouses. I have a wife who's in medicine. She did her surgery residency at Duke. So I had to leave California, get a fellowship in North Carolina so we can live together. We were apart for 4 years. And naturally, the first thing I did once I got to my fellowship is I want to get the first job I can to stay here in North Carolina so we're not apart again. So we have a few years of gap between us. So she still had 3 years left in residency, a long 7-year academic program at Duke. And of course, IR fellowship at that time, the training paradigm has changed now. It was just a year. So I did what I did. And the first thing I did, you know, I set foot in the door in July and I signed my job contract 3 weeks later, believe it or not. And at that point, I was actually contending, even after just a couple of weeks there, I don't know, maybe I was really lucky, but I was contemplating 2 jobs. I got an offer from the fellowship position at UNC to stay on as faculty. And it just so happened that my chair of the department at the time, his buddy is a president of a local private practice group. And I got to meet him. And I went for the private practice job because I think kind of like what you've heard today with previous speaker, Adam, I kind of share the same sentiments. I wanted to have control over my practice. I am pretty entrepreneurial, though I didn't really recognize it at the time. So I took that first private practice job, had a great year in fellowship. and felt good knowing that I was going to live with my wife and all was going to be fine. That job was quite the adventure. It was actually, it was a good group, stable private practice, 17 people, a little bit of a weird setup. We staffed a community hospital that actually was under the Duke University umbrella, but the private practice group maintained their contract. So we weren't formally academic, but it was an academic environment. There were trainees in other sections that, you know, we'd encounter them. And so it was good. It was kind of a community academic setup, but private ultimately. It was a standard IR job. And for those of you here going into IR, you'll probably see this where, you know, in a standard private practice setup, you're going to have to do diagnostic radiology. And my split, I think at that time was 70-30, eventually went more towards 80 or 20, but I grew very disenchanted with this. And I think, you know, the reason I went private is because I wanted to create my own existence. I knew there was an opportunity in this particular submarket where there weren't high level cases being done. I can use those great skills that I learned from two great institutions to try to take great care of patients. So I sensed an opportunity, but what I didn't realize is I didn't understand the economic models that results in us practicing in a combined IR-DR fashion. And that's going down a huge rabbit hole that I can spend hours talking about it. But I think, you know, what ultimately ended up happening was I wanted to be a clinically focused IR. I love doing DR. I can talk about that in a little bit. I still do a lot of DR, but I don't like mixing it with my IR, and that's me. I like making sure that my IR is IR when I'm at work, and I want to be clinically focused, have a clinic, round on patients, do what I can, do great work. And that job was not for me. And I would contend that a lot of private practice IR, DR jobs are not like that. And some of you may want a mixed position, and that's okay. But I think a lot of us heading down this new pathway don't. So what ended up happening is I got a unique opportunity to join a cardiologist. There was a local cardiologist in the market. I met him through a device manufacturer in the atherectomy space, and he wanted to create an outpatient-based lab. And you know, I got to meet him probably about, you know, maybe 8 or 9 months before he wanted to do that. At this point, I was growing pretty, you know, I was growing tired of my job. I definitely was getting burned out. I was taking Q3 call. I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. I did a terrible job negotiating my contract. I had zero leverage. I was getting paid like crap. I just needed to make a change. So I decided to join this guy, and it was a unique position where I had some equity ownership. I was a minority stake, but I can come in and I can help diversify his practice. So we went out like two rogues, and we just basically opened up a shop in Cary, North Carolina, and we went to work, and it was actually quite successful. So, you know, from day one, we were profitable. It took me about 3 months, but I was able to get my levels up, and I started doing a high volume of prostate artery embolization, and that's kind of what I enjoyed doing the most. So I ended up doing that, and it actually turned out to be good. But this was now a position where I actually loved what I was doing clinically, but the business side of things, I started to learn about very quickly. And, you know, what ultimately happened is it was a flawed partnership where we didn't see eye to eye on certain things. I joined him thinking that we'd have the ability to grow together and we can share in vascular consults, but naturally he doesn't need me to do vascular cases if he can do vascular cases, right? So you got to understand how any organization makes money and how you fit into that organization. And that's a hard lesson I learned from that position. At this time, my wife was about to start vascular surgery fellowship. Match has been unkind to us 2 times. One, cross country with her matching at Duke and me going to UCSF. And 2, we wanted to stay in the Raleigh-Durham area for her fellowship, but that didn't work out. She ended up in New York City. So about 15 months into the OBL job, we were profitable at this point. I sold out my stake and I decided to move on. And I got 2 years now where my wife is wrapping up for training in New York City. Neither of us having ties to New York City. We don't plan on living there. We're not city people. But you got to do something for a couple of years. And I learned so much about things like non-competes, all these restrictive covenants. And I just realized, look, I don't want any strings attached. I know the finances of IR-DR practices and now independent vascular OBLs like the back of my hand. I know how people make money and I know where the incentives are aligned. So I said, forget it. I'm going to be my own boss. So I went out there and decided to do locums. And that's what I'm really here to talk to you about. So I've been doing this now for about 6 months. I have a pretty interesting practice, actually. So I spend about 2 to 3 weeks of my time in a small, it's actually a decent sized hospital, 400-bed hospital, but it's in small town, Duluth, Minnesota. So I'm way up there. I'm living out of a suitcase as I speak to you right now. Everyone's excited because it's 35 degrees out, and that's the warmest it's been in a while. But here I am. This is actually a very interesting practice. There's 3 IRs, including myself. We're kind of a little bit of a tertiary referral center for our area. We do great work. It's 100% IR, and I negotiated my contract to be very favorable. So put it in perspective, I could work a quarter of the year and make just as much money as I would have as a partner in my first IR/DR job. Okay. But this is not everything I want to do in IR. This is really to keep my skills sharp. Now, what I really love doing is being in the outpatient world. So I have 1 to 2 weeks a year where I've actually established relationships with the managerial services organization that staffed my lab back in Cary, North Carolina. I maintain good relationships with those folks. And I contract with several different OBLs in Florida. So I'll spend a couple of weeks up here in Minnesota doing the hospital thing, take call, et cetera. It's pretty hard work. My weeks are long, 60+ hours. And then I'll hop on a plane, and then I'll go down to Florida and basically thaw out, where I'll do OBL coverage for a week or two. I have a couple different contracts there where I do mostly vascular work, PAD, some dialysis, embolization work. And then in addition to that, I do clinical consulting for a couple OBLs where I teach other physicians in their labs how to do prostate artery embolization. So I'm a little bit all over the place. My wife gets 2 weekends off a month. I get 2 weekends off a month. So during those times, we either meet in New York or we go to North Carolina, where we still have a home. So that's pretty much how my life looks like right now. This is obviously not something that I plan on doing forever. This will come to an end when she's done with her training. And my ultimate goal is to establish my own practice, which I feel like I now have the necessary knowledge to do that. But I think in terms of, you guys, a couple points to address, when's the first time, when should you start looking for jobs? I say the moment you start thinking about it, even early in training, just start, okay? And the biggest thing that you can really do is make communications, make contacts with people. Don't worry about these job boards. By the time you see a job on a job board, it's probably kind of late, honestly. I mean, there's exceptions, but radiology has become so corporatized, right? You got the Envisions, the Rad Partners of the world, private equity buying up places left and right. They're just looking for labor, okay? And maybe some of these jobs fit your life very well. And I think, for teleradiology especially, it makes a lot of sense. But I think for a lot of us, maybe we want a little bit more control over how we do things. And I think getting to know people, understanding the lay of the land in any given geographic environment is really based on who you know, and that's how you learn, okay? All politics are local. So I think that's one thing that I did that was actually helpful in landing my job, is I started making contacts with people in North Carolina before I even moved out here. I think that really helped. So that was pretty key. And I do think that is the best way to get a job. I think it's to actually network, all right? So that's very important. I think it's easier these days. Maybe there's more people on Twitter and other social media platforms, and a lot of us are willing to share about our markets. So I think that's good. I think, I know we're going to have a speaker talking about contracts and negotiations. Gosh, I'm going to be taking notes because I could have used that information back when. But my employment contract, thinking about, my first contract I signed, I had no idea what I was looking at. I mean, it's just a bunch of jargon. I had a friend, I got a bunch of friends who are in law. I'm sure a lot of you do too. And I had one of my buddies who does contract law look at it, but he's not a healthcare attorney, he has no idea. So, the key thing is, I think there's a couple of things that you ought to look at. You obviously want to look at a path to partnership if it exists in your practice. You want to make sure that's clearly defined. Okay, I think that's very helpful. That tends to be a common reason a lot of young radiologists leave their positions before, as an associate. Some groups have very convoluted paths to partnerships. You want to clarify that. You want to corroborate what the partnership salary range is going to be. It's good to get like a good 5-year range, and your group president, whoever you interview with, might tell you one thing, and that's what I got. But I didn't do the due diligence of actually asking the other partners in the group, hey, could you corroborate this? And there's nice ways you can do that. I'm happy to talk to people offline about that. But it just so happened, I get into my job, and 13, 14 months in, and I realized that what I thought I was going to make is actually about $150,000 less as a partner. So that didn't help the matter. Okay, so that's important. Your restrictive covenants are very important. Most of us leave our first job. Okay, very few of us, especially these days, actually stay. Okay, and I'm not saying that you can't get a good job that you're going to love and you're going to stay in. I hope that for you. But the fact of the matter is, a good proportion of us end up moving on. And I think it's important to understand what restrictions you'll have when you do so. So for instance, I had a very strict covenant in Durham, North Carolina. It basically said that I could not practice medicine, not just radiology, not IR, medicine in Durham and Orange counties of North Carolina. So I had to go across town to Wake County, which if you look at a map, it's like 20 miles away, not a big deal, but that definitely posed problems when I was in the OBL and I was trying to get referrals. I'm trying to go out pounding the pavement and talking to gynecologists, podiatrists, whatever. You got to be careful when you're doing that. And even though, you know, some would question, oh, those are never enforceable. You don't want to be caught up trying to pay a lawyer a ton of money to try to fight something like that, okay? Because large groups will drown you out, all right? So I think that was pretty important.
And was this for a couple of years, or was it for like forever that you cannot practice in those?
Yeah, it's for 2 years. It's a good question. It's for 2 years, which tends to be pretty common. I think a lot of restrictive covenants tend to be a little less harsh than that. They're typically, you know, you can't practice radiology for a 30-mile radius or 50-mile radius or within 5 miles of any of our freestanding imaging centers or something like that, right? But you want to look at that. And what you really don't want to do is you don't want to put yourself in a position where if that job doesn't work out, you're hosed from that market. Okay, that's the problem. Because think about it, if you have family, if you have kids, that's a lot to have to uproot everything. And I think that tends to be a point of discontentment for a lot of young radiologists. They feel stuck whether or not they like their job. They're just stuck. It's just handcuffs. So I think that's very important. So, you know, I think that kind of gets to the last question that I know you guys want to address is what would you have done differently? Is I would have really focused on having an out. And while you want to create positive relationships and you want to, you know, foster good working relationships with your, you know, future colleagues, you never know what the future is going to hold. Okay, your job may not end up being what you signed up for. Okay, a partner could leave, your work responsibilities could change, your hospital could lose a contract, you can gain a contract, who knows? Maybe the senior partners, you know, sell out. They want that $2-3 million buyout from private equity, and you're hosed. You know, maybe you're not going to make that great partner salary anymore. So I think it's important to have an out, and it's okay to negotiate. You should negotiate. That shouldn't be a sign of weakness. That shouldn't feel like, you know, you're being too picky or anything like that. I think as trainees, we're often accustomed to just kind of, you know, taking it on the chin and just, you know, nodding and smiling and doing what we need to do to save face and, you know, do the work that we do, right? And get to the end. But you know, once you get out there, it's different. I think you got to put your business hats on. So I think that's important. Anyway, I hope I didn't go over time. That's kind of an overview. I think the final question I think I might have missed was the draw for locums. I think the draw for locums is flexibility. Okay. If you find yourself where you have, you know, uncertainty in your life, you know, you're trying to align with the spouse, or maybe you're not sure where you want to live, or you're not sure what's going to work out for your family. I think the beauty of locums is you can try before you buy. Okay. I think that's the big thing. I think for me, you know, I'm very entrepreneurial minded. I know what I want to do. I don't want any tape. Okay. I want the ability to do what I love without having to answer to anyone really, other than just my patients, just be a good doctor. And that's what I love about locums, because it provides me that flexibility. I think the financial aspects of locums are great. It's pure leverage. You're working for facilities who are in desperate need of someone. You can do great, you know, financially, and work a lot less to make that. Obviously comes at a cost. Your time, your flexibility, travel, things like that. You have to make sure you're in a good position. I wouldn't do locums coming right straight out. I think it serves a need. I think it's good to maybe supplement a day job with locums if you're so inclined. But without me having had those initial 2 years in the hospital, that would have, you know, this would have been very, very hard. I think it was good to become a good doctor first. It takes a little while to become, you know, somewhat comfortable as an attending. With respect, there's a question potentially about state licensure, and it's a total pain because, you know, you do have to report, you know, where you've worked, you know, when you're applying for new state licenses. And that gets annoying. It's very much a hassle, but I wouldn't let that deter you, because no matter where you end up going for job credentialing in a hospital, especially, they're going to want to know everything about you. And it sucks no matter where you go. I mean, you're always going to have to list everything. It's painful. And there's plenty of people who make money off of this process, which is another story. But I think, yeah, you have to be very organized. And once you start doing locums and you kind of understand how credentialing and state licensure works, it becomes a lot easier. So, you know, I think I'm now licensed in 5 different states. And I think, you know, if I get any more licenses, it'll just be, each one will be easier because you understand the process, you just get better at it. Anyway, I guess I'll stop there and we can move on.
All right, thank you very much. That was very informative. Our next panelist is Dr. Tiffany Han. Dr. Han is a University of Utah Medical School graduate and is currently a PGY5 DR resident at Norwalk Hospital in Connecticut. Dr. Han will continue her radiology training with abdominal imaging and ultrasound fellowship at UCSF. After fellowship graduation in 2023, she will be joining private practice in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Tiffany. Nice to meet you, kind of virtually, I guess. I'm going to go ahead and also stop my video in case, just try to optimize my connection here since it's been a little laggy. So I'm Tiffany Han. I'm originally from Salt Lake City, Utah. I completed medical school at the University of Utah and currently completing my residency at Norwalk Hospital in Norwalk, Connecticut. And then as was mentioned, I'll be doing an abdominal imaging and ultrasound fellowship at UCSF. And I just recently, I guess in January, I signed a contract with a private group in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'll be starting there in summer of 2023 after fellowship, which I know seems a little bit early, but I'll kind of get into that as I keep talking. So I think, I can't speak to everyone else's experience, and this is obviously from a very early time in training and sort of like the resident perspective. I too had all of those questions, when do I start? What do I start? Where do I look? And all of those things that came up. So for me, I knew that I think it all came down to kind of region, because I knew I wanted to go back to Salt Lake City, Utah, because of family and because of the mountains. And it was just, that was kind of like my biggest thing after, spending a lot of time, obviously away from the West, literally almost as far as you can go in Connecticut. All my family and all of my husband's family is in Utah and California. And so being away for this long is kind of, and then we also had a child about 18 months ago. And so being away kind of made us both realize, what do we want as a family, and kind of what are our priorities, and going back to the West was kind of a big thing for us. And so because I knew that that was so important to me, and I also knew that there were only 3 main groups in the region I wanted to be in specifically, I decided to reach out pretty early on, obviously. So I didn't know anything about the process. I didn't know how things were for everyone else. And from what I could tell from my seniors, there were some seniors that waited until they were in fellowship. I had my chief 2 years ago, who signed his contract during residency. So it was kind of all over the place. And so what I ended up doing was what I think is really invaluable, and that's just reaching out to your colleagues, people you trust, your mentors, and kind of asking their experience. And also, I find a lot of value in these types of virtual meetings. I also attended the one that was hosted by Rad Discord, and it was kind of this whole Shark Tank talk, and very similar setup where we got to hear from a lot of different practicing radiologists in different settings and sort of what their life is like. Because honestly, during residency, I think more or less we have the very similar life where we're going to work, being on call, and doing all the same things. But then when you start thinking about, as an attending, what do you want in your actual practice when it comes to you after training, it kind of start asking some different questions. And so I, turned to my colleagues. I had several who went into private practice and several who just signed actually in academics. And I was lucky enough to have one particular colleague who is about 3 years ahead of me, graduated from the same medical school, also finished at UCSF, his fellowship there in abdominal imaging, which is what I'm going into. And he actually signed with the group in Utah that I was hoping to sign with. So I had a really good kind of an inside scoop, and he was able to tell me, he doesn't have any reason to hold back any information from me. And he was able to be very honest with me. And so I kind of had a really good idea of what the job would be like if I were to, get an offer from them. And I should say that's kind of how everything started. He gave me the contact for their site director, and I reached out to them, and I kind of I was, to be honest, I was very naive about the process, if you can't tell already, but I basically wrote an email to the director after being introduced to him and said, I know it may be a little bit early and you may not be looking at people in training and in residency right now to be considered for a position, but if there's any potential projections in like your needs in the next 2 years, because that's when I'll be finishing, I would love to chat. And, I'm in town often because I'm visiting my parents and my family there. So, if I'm in town and you happen to have a minute or lunch you could spare, we could just talk during then. And actually, I was really pleasantly surprised. He even said like, you're definitely not early. We've even maybe even like a month late, and jokingly, and he said that they already hired 6 people. So they're a rapidly growing group, obviously, but 6 people to start this summer. And then 3 more for my year 2023. And so I think that kind of gave me a really good sense, like a jolt as to like how the current market is. Because as you can imagine, the job market pretty much is, it can kind of vary year to year. And I just remember 5 to 10 years ago, in medical school, like I remember friends saying they were doing fellowships because they couldn't get jobs, versus now the market, seems to be very good for new grads. And then even like during COVID in the last 2 years, things were a little bit uncertain. I remember some attendings or some radiologists would kind of talk about like, I actually don't know what's going to happen to the job market. So, but I think all projections so far have been very positive. And just from my experience, even I went to RSNA this year, and even there, like a lot of groups were really like promoting their practices and really like basically inviting people to apply and saying, kind of promoting their practice. So I think right now what I'm trying to say is that the market is actually very good, and it seems very good for all sorts of settings. So academics, private, teleradiology, locums. I'm seeing a lot of those things. And one place you can look is jobs.acr.org. I think that's where kind of I would like go just to get an idea of like what postings are there. And as was said previously, not a lot of places won't even post their jobs. Like the place that I ended up signing with, they didn't have any job postings. And in fact, when I emailed them, they kind of weren't sure either. They're like, well, we're not really sure, and but we'll keep you in mind, basically. And I thought in my mind, okay, they're just like being nice and telling me like, we don't have a spot for you, good luck. But then this comes back to the point of really, kind of being connected with people, because that same colleague of mine was able to give me another contact to one of the other 3 groups in Utah that I was looking at, and she was able to get me in contact with the hiring department, basically, of their group. And so I ended up having 2 interviews in the region that I knew for sure that I wanted to go back to. And so I flew to Utah, had interviews with them, had dinners with them, and I kind of was able to get a good feel for both groups and kind of make my decision there. And so I think it's just really important to just keep an open mind, make sure you talk to your mentors and seniors and people you trust, and get a good feel for the climate. As I was talking about the job market, it seems really good right now. And just don't underestimate networks. A lot of practices, like I said, don't post. And so some of it is word of mouth, some of it is luck. And so I think that's really important. And those contacts are really important. Let's see, I made some notes here just so I would stay on track. But again, attending these informative sessions also is really important, because I think that it's really hard to get a really good sense of what each type of practice is like. And then everyone is very different and want different things for their career. There's a wide variety of settings, obviously, that you're hearing about now. And each type comes with unique features and things. I think what I wanted to stress is just to ask yourself, and these are kind of like the contract points. I know that my title was under contract negotiations, but I am by no means a contract negotiation expert. This is just me sharing my experience, but definitely ask yourself geography. If there is a place you have to be or you'd love to be, then focus on that. The settings, So do you want teaching responsibilities? Do you want to do tumor boards? Do you want admin time? Or do you want to simply be like a workhorse? You don't like teaching, you don't want to be interrupted, that kind of stuff. It really does matter. Types of exams you'll be reading. These are all things that I wanted to make sure I knew very clearly before signing anything. The types of exams that you'll be reading, because so this group that I'm joining is actually, they kind of call it like private pracademia. So it's a private group, but it's quite large. It's on the large side. It's about 60 radiologists, and it is very subspecialized. So, neuroradiology, they have like neurorads, body, IR. So it's like you're in academics, but not really training anyone. So that's kind of like the private pracademia aspect of it. So knowing exactly what types of exams you'll be reading, general versus subspecialized, your expected volumes to read, I think that's also important, because there are some practices that, have certain numbers they want you to hit, or RVUs, and they'll let you want to know what that number is, because you'll kind of get a sense of what your numbers are like towards the end of your training. And obviously, like for me, it's before fellowship, so I'll know like what I need to kind of like work up to, or where I should be to be comfortable. And then how is productivity measured? I think that was really important too. Just how are you getting feedback, and how often is that happening? Because you don't want to be, surprised at any given point and where they're just like, you're not hitting your number, sorry, like I don't know what to tell you, so I thought that was really important for me too. Procedures, that's another thing you have to ask yourself. Are you going to be doing procedures? Do you want to do procedures, or you do not want to? And then nights, weekends, and call. I think different places have different sort of structures. There are practices that have no nights. There's some that do require nights, and then weekends and calls. So make sure you kind of like get a really good understanding of that, because that's not, not all the time will those things be like written out in your contract, but like you just really want to know, you don't want to be surprised. And then of course, this was mentioned earlier, I think this is really important for contracts. Partnership. What is a partnership track? Is it offered, and what's the buy-in? What's the structure? Is it tiered? Some places have tiered partnerships. Do older partners get more say or first choice on things, or is it completely equal once everyone makes partner? I think that was really important to me. The practice that I am joining, everything, like once your partner, it's a two-year partnership track, and once your partner, everything is equal. And I think that for me, that just kind of took away some of the stress of like always wondering, like, am I making what others are making? And like, are they getting something that I don't know about? I just didn't want to have to even think about any of that. So they were very transparent about all of this. And then you also want to know, like, because a lot of us will not, I think we have to realize most people will not stay at their first jobs straight out of training. I think that's just like a known fact. So I think if you're coming from a different job, you also want to know, like, are you grandfathered into like a partnership track? Like some places have a 3-year track, and if you've been working so many years at a private practice, they'll like shorten that amount of time for you. So that doesn't apply in my case, but I think that's also something you should definitely consider. And then the big thing, like the non-competes, that was one thing in my contract that I actually did bring up. Mine stated like it was like a non-compete. You can't work anywhere at a radiology practice within 15 miles of where they were. And this group also practices all across the valley. So they have like 13 different locations that, you could potentially work at. So I had to clarify like 15 miles from exactly which building, and how is this enforced? Like what that would mean, I'd have to like literally leave the state with my family, and that's a huge deal for me. And so definitely look at the non-compete. I didn't know that they could say like can't practice medicine in general. So that I think is also really important to pay attention to. And then of course, like any job, I think, looking at the benefits, the retirement, some places offer like a cash balance plan, HSA bonuses, and like a lot of this will naturally come out in your conversation. I think that it's a red flag if like practices aren't trying to not tell you something. I got a lot of the feel for the work culture at the dinner, because it's typically dinner is with like the partners of the group, or, you know, basically anyone that you'd be working with potentially. And I think I got a really good feel for the work culture in general. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat just in case I would miss something. Okay, so honestly, most contracts are standard legal language. They are pretty, I think most places, they're very, very similar across the board in terms of like what to expect in their little contracts. But I think it also depends on where you are at in your career. But I think that it wouldn't hurt to get a lawyer to look over your contract. I think that the fee for a lawyer to look over a contract varies quite a lot. So on the lower end, I know some people have paid like, I don't know, like $200 to $400, and then on the high end, I've had people pay multiple thousands. So I think it kind of depends on, you know, where you are at in your career. Like if you've been practicing for a number of years and you have certain things you have to address with like the previous place you were working, I think that definitely is something you have to consider. Yeah, so it's the standard contract thing. Everyone will say that. So just, I would read through the contract very carefully. And if you feel uncomfortable, or if you feel like you can't quite understand something, or something doesn't seem as like crystal clear as day, then I would definitely have someone look at it. So, okay, so we're also getting Dr. Devalapalli is basically, he should have been doing the contract negotiation talk, not me. But yeah, malpractice is a huge thing. Make sure you do have tail coverage, and you have it covered by the employer. They don't ask me how I know. So yeah, I think that it is really important to know what the malpractice covers and how long it covers you for. And these are all things that like you honestly like don't know until you are reading over and you're like, I don't even know what that means. So you want to definitely have that tail coverage and make sure that they'll cover it. And those are really important things that I think, you know, obviously, if you did have a lawyer look at it, they would definitely be able to advise you on for your particular situation. Okay. I saw in my email that there was someone who asked how to ask for certain benefits like relocation expenses, student loan repayments, etc. I will say a lot of this, I guess it depends on the practice that you are interviewing with, but luckily where I signed with, they were very, very transparent about it. I think that was kind of why I was drawn to them at the end of the day. And if you don't feel if they don't come out and say like, hey, we give you a $15,000 relocation expense, and we also like give you a $10,000 bonus right off the bat, then, and you want to ask about it, I think it's okay to say, you know, I know there are practices that offer X, Y, and XYZ type of benefits or programs in them. Do you have similar things, or would you be open to discussing that? And would that be a potential thing, an agreement that we could have? And I think that's, I mean, it's totally appropriate. I mean, you are interviewing for this job for a reason, right? And in the same way, in the same vein, they're also interviewing you because they want to know that you're the right fit. The good thing is that the market is so good that I think everything works in kind of the applicant's favor at this point right now in time. So, and I guess, you know, at the end of the day, my biggest thing is just kind of like realize again that most people will not stay at their first jobs. I think that was really scary for me to even like say, because I'm like, I really want this to be my first and last job, because the whole process is kind of daunting and there's a lot to consider. But I think once you accept that, you know, this may not be the best practice, and you'll learn a lot, obviously, from listening to the previous speakers, that you learn a lot through this whole process and through your jobs, and you'll find out what are your non-negotiables, what are the things that you absolutely need, and what are those, because sometimes we don't even know, like, do I really need, this many vacation days, or do I need to know my RVUs and can I hit those? You know, those are things that, like, I think you learn with time and with practice. And so I'm also kind of in that boat of trying to figure that out. So I know this wasn't like a hard and fast rule. I wish I was able to like give you guys like, this is what you do, but hopefully some of this anecdotal experience has been a little, somewhat helpful to you. And that's all I have.
No, certainly. Thank you so much for all the interesting information. We are now going to the Q&A session. We have a few questions that we would like to start with. And if any of the members of the audience have any questions, they could type in the chat box and we will try to have them addressed as well. So the first question is for Dr. K, and I think this has been discussed in the chat box as well as Dr. Han talked a little bit about it. What is the average number of RVUs per year expected from a DR in private practice? And when do you think that, oh, this is too many RVUs and I may not be able to like handle this much?
So, I wanted to answer this because I actually don't know I don't know what that number is for us, because there's a good reason for that, because our practice doesn't track them, or at least we don't have an RVU floor or anything. I think that speaks to the culture of the practice a little bit. And I think it's something to look out for. You can hear from other people if they, some of the other panelists, that they know exact RVU numbers. I don't. And if a practice is demanding a certain number of RVUs from you, I guess I can sort of understand it in tele, where there's less other things that you're going to be doing. You're not going to be doing tumor boards. You're not going to be doing, as much resident teaching, things like that. But if you told me that I had to hit a certain resident floor, a certain RVU floor, and I'm at the hospital reading CAT scans with a resident, I'm not going to be able to teach them as much, right? And we've already seen this as volumes go up, it definitely eats into resident teaching time. If you're applying for a job and they give you an RVU floor, you need to do some research into what that means and how much that is, because what you don't want to be in is a situation where you go to a job and you are basically they treat you like a workhorse so that the older radiologists can slack off and take more vacation. That's not, at least for me, that's not the kind of culture I would want to join. So I don't actually know the answer to what the number of RVUs is. I will tell you what sort of an average and busy day for me would be. So if I'm at the hospital today, I was covering CT and ultrasound at the hospital. I probably read about 30 something CAT scans, and I probably read about, I don't know, somewhere around the same number of ultrasounds, something like that. That was an average busy day. On the busier days, I mean, I've had 1 or 2 days where I've read over 40 CAT scans, and that gets very busy. And that's on a, sort of an 8 to 5 shift. In an office setting where I'm not teaching residents, I mean, you'd think that I would be reading more, but the truth is that when I'm in the office, I'm also fielding questions from the techs. There's a lot more things that I'm doing that take up my time. And a busy day there, and a sort of an average office day might be something along the line of 20 something CTs. Now that might seem low to some people, maybe some other people who are attending here who are saying that's low. But I wear a lot of other hats in the practice. I mean, I have fielding questions from all of our MRI techs about body MRI, from the nuclear medicine techs. I'm doing the nuclear medicine treatments. I'm going to talk to patients. I mean, there are things that take up your time other than simple RVU. So my advice would be to, depending on what kind of person you are, know yourself. For me, I didn't want to be in a place where I was going to be expected to have, X number of RVUs. It just sort of wasn't, it didn't fit my personality. And that's not because I'm slow. I don't think I'm slow. If you can ask our residents that are here, I think I read pretty quick. I think practices that can spend too much time concentrating on RVUs can it should say, it says something about their culture.
Thank you. And the next question also for you, Dr. K, is, can you tell us a little more about partner track versus employee versus associate tracks?
Sure. So partner track. So I think just on partner tracks, I think one of the points that that Kavi brought up was really good. He was talking about, you know, basically about what is a partner track. So some of these places, you know, especially some that may have been either bought out recently or merged with a hospital or whatever, you know, a partner doesn't mean partner, and you need to make sure that you clarify, as I think as Tiffany, as Dr. Hahn was saying, what does a partner mean? So let's say it's 2 years to partner. Well, what does that mean? Are you a professional partner? Do you just get a share of the professional reimbursement? Does the practice own anything? Do you become a part owner? Is there a buy-in? How much does that buy? You know, what multiple of the earnings every year is that buy-in? So, you know, if you're, depending on what the kind of practice is. So for us, you know, well, for some private practices, at least in sort of the older model before a lot of them started getting bought out, there would be a professional and a technical side, right? And a lot of times, you know, the first thing that you get to become sort of quote partner in is the professional side. What does that mean? That just means that, you know, you collect a share of whatever the professional revenues of the practice are. The professional means what they make, just, you know, on a case, professional, technical. Professional is just what you make for being a radiologist doing the act of reading, not for the reimbursement for the act, you know, for the ownership of the scanner or employing the techs to run the scanner or employing the front office people to get them through, or the contrast, the cost of the contrast. That's all on the technical side. So you have to sort of know, are you buying into a professional or a professional and technical, or a technical side? There are certainly people who would be perfectly happy and just being an associate, sort of an associate, right? An associate, at least in our practice, and what it would mean for, I think, most private practices would be, you're not going to become partner. You're going to make a salary. You're going to eventually, that salary will go up. Obviously, like I would hope you would negotiate that your salary goes up, you know, with inflation, things like that. But you're never going to becoming owner. You're never going to be, your salary is not going to be dependent on what you make, is not going to be dependent on, you know, how much money the practice makes. It's just a negotiated salary. So those are sort of the different types of partner. Now, a lot of places are saying, you know, it's 2 years to partner. Well, what does that partnership mean? It might just mean you happen to be making as much as the rest of the partners, and it has no bearing on, you know, how the practice does. You know, if the practice has a good year, you're not going to make more. If the practice does, but the other side of that is that if the practice does worse, you're not going to make less. I think there was just something in the chat. I think Kavi and Tiffany were talking about private equity. I have to go in a minute or two. I just wanted to get my thoughts in on that. You know, this thing about selling to venture capitalists or private practice, that's a really important point. And this is a really hard thing to gauge, because you never know when you're, as Tiffany was saying, when you're, you know, going out to dinner with the partners, you try to get during your interview, you're trying to get a feel for what they're like, right? And they're going to tell you a lot of things, and for all you know, they could be planning on selling the practice a year or two after you get there and sort of pulling the rug out from under you. And it's happened to people I know, friends of mine from you know, from the ACR and from residency and things like that. And it's not a good thing, because you've just moved. You know, this is one of the reasons that I think Kavi and Tiffany were talking in depth about your restrictive covenant, because if they pull that rug out from under you, all of a sudden you're stuck either staying on, and you're never going to make as much as you would have had they not sold. You probably are not going to get anything out of the sale. Most of them don't. You know, some of them throw something, you know, throw some sort of pocket change at the associates who haven't made partner yet, but some of them don't. I don't have a good answer for you. It's a really tough thing to gauge, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind as you eat dinner with these people. Are these the kind of people that I think would do that? Or are these the kind of people that are saying the right things about practice ownership and wanting to maintain ownership for themselves, right? There's other things you can do besides selling to private equity or selling to a hospital system that position you well for the future in radiology without having to sell out. And look, there are some people who might say, look, the private equity route is for me. Like, I want to be an employee. There's a lot of this stuff that Adam's talking about ownership of, and a lot of stuff, Kavi's talking about the entrepreneurial stuff that you just don't want to deal with. And that's totally fine. That's a when Ashton's talking about what's an associate track, that's more of an associate track, and that's totally fine if that's what you want to be. If for me, it wasn't for me. It sounds like Kavi wasn't for him, but that's something to keep in mind, that it's becoming harder to avoid the whole private equity thing is becoming harder to avoid because it is sort of getting its tentacles in all over the country now. So,
all right, thank you very much, Dr. K.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so our next question would be for Dr. Devlapalli. So how does the IR job market look right now in terms of a breakdown between like a hybrid practice, like a DR-IR practice versus like OBLs, or like a full-time IR practice like in a hospital setting?
Great question. I would probably say 95% standard IR/DR radiology group practice. And then the mix is going to be a few random OBL practices and maybe some academic practices. So the majority of us end up in private practice. Okay, that's just, there's more private practice opportunities out there than academic opportunities. At least 80% of us end up in private practice. And oftentimes the jobs that you see out there are part of radiology groups. Okay, so I think, you kind of have to understand that, because in a radiology groups, they could vary widely, all right? But it all comes down to the finances in a radiology group. And, ultimately, at the end of the day, group culture definitely matters, but our production is measured how it's measured. And oftentimes an IR will be more or less forced to help out with the diagnostic workload, because that's what's driving revenue for a practice in a hospital. Now, you change that equation when you start talking about outpatient practices, and that's what kind of led me down that road. But it's hard to get into an outpatient practice right out of training. I think you need to have very good skills. I think you have to be a little entrepreneurial, and I don't think it's the right fit for most people. So I think, that's kind of the job mix, if you will. I think a lot of us fare well doing pretty well in a standard position for at least a few years. That's kind of my opinions on that.
Thank you. The next question is for pretty much anyone who'd be interested.
Ashwin, can I
Sure.
say one thing there? So I think Kavi brings up a good point about the talking about the IR/DR mix. Kavi, it sounds like definitely wanted to go down more of the road of being solo IR, and there's definitely plenty of jobs like that. If you are going into IR, what I would warn is I know personally, so my uncle happens to be one of them. My uncle's an IR doctor who, after he turned 55, his back was hurting. He didn't want to throw the lead on every day anymore. And it was nice to have that backup, as that he could cut down on his IR. The practice could hire another IR person so that his burden of call wasn't as much. His back was saved, and he could do more DR. So, there's the other side of it. And, but that being said, there's certain people who go into IR because they want, as Kavi was saying, they want that outpatient real IR experience, seeing patients in clinic. And that's totally fine too. But there are, if you're going into IR, sort of my advice would be know yourself in that sense, right? Where do you see yourself, not just in 5 years, but where do you see yourself in 20 years? Are you still going to want to be putting lead on every day? And are you still going to want to, be taking overnight call, having to come into the hospital and do an embolization at 2 a.m. When you are 55, 60 years old? That's just something to keep in mind. And that's one of the reasons I, personally think that we should always keep IR under sort of the radiology umbrella and stay brothers and sisters in arms together. But that's another soapbox. That's for another talk. So
you can't let you get the last word on that. All right. So I got a counter to that. Okay. So I agree with you. I think that it's important that we remain under the same umbrella for purposes of training, most definitely. because what Adam is saying is absolutely correct. You want to have, if you have a way to diversify how you make money, and if it's something that you enjoy doing, why not? So I think a lot of us doing 100% IR like doing DR. We just don't like doing it under the constraints of a radiology group in which our RVUs are not as high as neuroradiologists, and we have less leverage, and we have to come in for embolizations at 2 a.m. because we're forced to be the anchor to support a radiology contract. That's the issue. I'm saying that you can continue to do DR, but it doesn't have to be in this traditional context. You can create your own path to do that. So one of the things that I do is I still do plenty of DR. I do teleradiology. I work for the VA. So I do it on my own time. It's, you know, it's like apples and oranges. You know, I love them both. I just don't like them both at the same time. And it's up for everyone to decide how they'd like to practice. And I think that's the big thing. There's all sorts of restrictions right now with radiology pseudo-exclusive contracts, which prevents IRs from being truly independent. And that's the big issue. I have a blog. I write a ton about it, linemonkeymd.com. If anyone's interested, please check it out. It's probably going to derail this conversation completely, but I do think that Adam makes up some great points. I think you got to know yourself. I think you got to know, you know, what your intentions are. I think if you happen to be an IR in training who enjoys the DR side, I think it's good to keep that sharp. Absolutely.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Gabi. I agree.
Thank you so much, Gabi. So our next question is for Sam. You know, how are there any tips you have for negotiating for protected academic time? This is for an academic.
Yeah. In terms of negotiation, as I said earlier, when you want to go to an academic job, and kind of I also want to do like a little bit of follow-up on what Adam just said. And in terms of the negotiation of the academic time, as I said, the time are pretty much set. In academia, you do not really have that much of a power to change what they have set in basics. But if I want you to tell you like how it usually works, is that usually recruitment for academic job is happening at the level of the section chief. So if you want to really go that way, what I recommend is this: just go there, do the interview, and then once the offer is done, so once you get the offer from the chief, that's the time that it goes to chair. And chair is the person who will decide how much time you get. That's the time that you can technically start negotiation. Do not start early on, because it may, you know, be, first of all, the chief usually do not really have as much power unless it's like a hugely academic and they specifically are recruiting you for a research heavy position, but that usually doesn't happen at assistant level, assistant professor level. So what I recommend is this, go there just as a regular, like 20% academic time. And then once you get the offer from the chief or from the chair, that's the time that you can start negotiating. And for negotiation, you need to have a plan. I personally didn't. I personally just said yes to what I had the offer. It's like a combination of things, like the timing, the location, and many other things. And then I just and remember that you can change this like along the way, depending on your productivity. Nothing is set in stone. I started with 20%. I basically like all the time that I get extra were like a grant supported. Having said that, you can always negotiate for a honeymoon period of 2 or 3 years where they give you more time off to do academic research. And I missed some of the things, like as they mentioned, for example, everybody knows that in academic practice, you get a pay cut compared to private practice. But the point that Adam said about, being at 60 and want to do IR, remember that if you're in an academic place, you can still do this. You can do IR at 60 because that's your fellow who will be scrubbed in. So again, I know that you probably get like a good 50% pay cut when you go to academia, but there are also some perks in terms of the, flexibility of your daily job in terms of, you're not really glued to the chair. But I mean, at the same time, also, the job always spills over, like at 5 p.m. it's not done. You go home, you still like have something to do, you have to prepare lectures and so. So something just to have in mind, that, everything has, pros and cons.
Thank you very much. We have a question in the chat box regarding any opinions or knowledge someone could share about companies like Rad Partners and Vision, pros and cons working for them.
I just posted in the chat, but I haven't worked for them. I don't know if any of our panelists have. But there was a pretty good article that I just posted in the chat about Envision, about mostly about the private equity firm KKR that owns them. But as opposed to, as for Rad Partners, I don't really know. I know people that have worked there and left. I know people that are still there. It's tough to get information out of people who have left because they have to sign a pretty strict NDA, non-disclosure agreement, when they leave. My thing would probably be buyer beware. There may be things that are good about working for them, that things like a very solid IT department that has been scaled up using economies of scale to sort of provide better IT service and sort of coordination at the top in terms of management. That being said, I think that the negatives probably for a young radiologist would definitely include things like upward mobility. They may promise you things that aren't necessarily in shareholders' best interests, and you have to be wary of that. So I have other things to say, but I don't want to get into them here. But I'm happy to talk offline with people who are considering this.
All right.
I just wanted to add that I agree with Evan, and I also have very strong feelings about the matter. The same thing exists in the IR world, but I have a lot of friends who worked for Rad Partners or Envision, and before their practices got bought out, and they had very negative things that they tell me privately that, of course, as Adam said, they can't say now. But I think at the end of the day, just understand what the role of private equity is as an investment vehicle, or in its own. Once you learn more about that, then you'll kind of figure it out for yourself.
Well put, Kavi.
Thank you very much. The next couple of questions.
I personally have to. Actually, this is Adam. I have to go because. But I thank you for having me. This was great.
Thank you very much.
And people can get in touch with me if they have specific questions. So.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here.
No problem. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night. All right. Moving on to the next question, which are directed primarily for teleradiology. If you can do. The question is whether you can do just subspecialty practices within a teleradiology system, like breast or peds or any other specialty.
Yes, you can. There are practices who, I've seen on ACR job center that practices are hiring for remote mammo. I haven't seen any for nuclear medicine. But the job that I'm joining next summer would be neuroradiology. So yes, there are practices who are hiring for subspecialties, but you definitely need to just search and look for them.
Thank you. And there's one more question about tele. What's the difference between corporate telerad practice and private tele practice?
So from my experience, which is very limited, I would say in corporates or big practices, basically, you will get more subspecialty read, or you have more more subspecialty radiologists involved because they're just bigger practices. So like in the practice I'm currently working with, we have like MSK, we have NUCs, we have like body, So like if you have any questions or if there are cases that you're not comfortable with, you can just reroute it to those subspecialty radiologists in your practice. I assume with the smaller practices, you don't have that flexibility just because there are like less people, and probably when you're working, you're probably only a rad, or maybe you're like 1 or 2 rads on the same shift. So that's one difference that I would say. And then probably in terms of pay, the pay should be different, I assume. But to be honest, I haven't talked to any smaller practices, but I just assume they're less flexible because they're smaller.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarvanas. The next question is, I mean, if anyone could answer it, but what are the pros and cons of working as a W-2 employee versus an independent, like as an independent contractor? Maybe Kavi could help out with this one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I've worked both ways before. I think, you know, nowadays a lot of us have the option in certain positions, especially in telerads. A lot of telerads companies or groups, whatnot, give you the option. And there's pros and cons to both. I think W-2, generally speaking, you know, it's a salary job. You're gonna get what you get, but the real key is you get benefits. Okay, so you're gonna get health insurance, you're gonna get some basic disability, you're gonna get, you know, paid time off, things like that. Okay, and you know, you'll get a regular paycheck, and it is what it is. It's as if you're getting paid right now in training. It's very similar in terms of the overall structure. Obviously, your compensation as an attending will be much higher. 1099 is different. Okay, 1099 is an independent contractor, so you're getting paid for, you know, the services that you provide. Okay, you're not necessarily getting paid to, you know, you're not an employee of the practice. You're pretty much a hired gun. Now, it can be structured in many different ways, but typically these are positions, typically, not always, but there are positions that don't actually have benefits, okay, health insurance, things like that, 401k, et cetera. Now, there are some serious pros to being a 1099, okay? You can have your own deductions. For instance, say you're a teleradiologist and, you know, you use a part of your house, like I do, to do teleradiology. Well, you can take the square footage of that and you can deduct that, you know, whatever amount of your mortgage is applied to that, you can take a deduction for your use, right? Your equipment, you can deduct. Your cell phone, if you use it to make calls, you can deduct. So you can end up deducting a lot of expenses. With retirement plans, there's beneficial aspects of being a 1099. You can actually, you know, contribute to your own solo 401k, a full, I think now in 2022, it's $61,000 a year, whereas if you're a W-2, you're going to be limited to the 19,500. I think they might have upped that a little bit, plus whatever the difference is that your employer will provide, which isn't always the full. They may not give you the difference between the 62 and the 20,000 that you can contribute as an employee. So you have a little bit more flexibility there. So I think all in all, W-2 tends to be easier just for your life. You can, you know, pretty much go to TurboTax and put in your returns. You know, tax time is very simple. 1099 tends to be a little bit more complex, but there are some serious benefits. Ideally, you would like to structure your life where you can have a little bit of both. So I made the comment earlier, you know, my wife's a W-2 employee. I'm a 1099 independent contractor. So she gets my deductions, I get her benefits. It works out pretty nicely. You can certainly work multiple radiology jobs where one's a W-2 and others a 1099, and you can have the benefits of one and the deductions from the other. So I think that's you know, that's how I'd look at it.
Thank you so much. And then there's another question directed to you for you in the chat. I think someone was asking if, you know, if you worked at the VA, do you do tele for them, or have you worked with them full time, and how was your experience with that?
VA teleradiology is probably one of my favorite jobs, even though I'm, you know, staunchly IR and I love taking care of patients, clinically focused, all that. I do enjoy diagnostic radiology, worked hard to obtain that skill set, and I love working for the VA. So VA teleradiology is great. I do it part-time. I'm a per diem, basically a fee basis teleradiologist. So it's not full-time. I basically work as little or as much as I want based on their needs, which are usually evening hours and weekends. So, you know, how that has looked like for me is I've been doing it since 2019, so almost 3 years now. You know, I'd probably average nowadays, not a whole lot, but before, for instance, when I was back in North Carolina, they had a reading station there. You know, I'd go in at least 10 to 20 hours a week actually and do work for them. And it's the perks of teleradiology, great IT infrastructure. You're not hassled by people when you're reading. You can just focus on the work. The payment is actually really good per case. So what you'll notice with a lot of, especially corporate teleradiology outfitters, is they nickel and dime you. They will take so much off over the top, and you might end up with like maybe 15, 20 bucks in RVU, something like that. Now the VA doesn't work on an RVU basis, but the payment per time or the payment per case is actually quite generous. It almost rivals some, good payer mix private practices. Obviously, or the governments, you're limited by how much you can make. I mean, nobody can make more than the president, right? So, but for the time you spend, it's actually really good. The colleagues there are really good. I've actually had a really good time working for them. There are people who do it full time. They tend to be, I think, a 7 and 14 or a 7 and 7, a standard, shift. There's daytime work. They're always looking. So I think, if someone's interested, I'd be more than happy to connect them. I know there's a comment, the private practice 29 per RVU these days. I think that sounds about right. I think, especially for telerads, I think it varies. I have friends in private practice radiology doing better than that. Probably depends on the payer mix as well. But I think for teleradiology, that seems about right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we are almost done with all the questions. And this is a very general question. Is there any, and we talked about it a little earlier regarding non-competes, but are there any red flags that you should be looking at while signing a contract?
I guess I'll talk. I don't want to dominate the discussion. There's a lot of red flags to look at. I think with respect to non-competes, you want to see what the scope of the non-compete is. You want to make sure, is it just radiology? Is it all medicine? I think that's a big thing. And don't even think about, is it enforceable or not? Okay, because you're going to end up spending a lot more money trying to tackle that question on the backside if somebody ever questions it than you would. Okay, so I think that's a big red flag. You want to try to get in touch with people who left the practice and ask why. Okay, and there's ways to do that. I think it's important, and you want to get an honest assessment of what didn't work out, what did work out, and I think kind of just realize at the end of the day, one person's bad opportunity is someone's great opportunity. Jobs are very personal, but that's what I'd add about that.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I think that concludes our Q&As. Unless anybody from the audience has, we have time for maybe like one last question, but it's already 8, but probably you can take one question if anybody has one.
Oh, I saw a question that somebody asked that I don't think I answered. It's, if you're a contractor, do you have to cover your own medical malpractice, or does your employer still cover that? That's a great question. It's what you negotiate is what it comes down to. So I don't cover any of my malpractice these days. I negotiate for that in all my contracts, and I think everybody should. And if you do that, make sure you also get tail coverage as well.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. This has been really great discussion. I thank all the panelists and the audience as well. We've had a significant turnout for this event, so thank you all.
Thank you so much. If we can share the PowerPoint, I will just show some links that would be helpful for some resources. I thank you all. Thank all the panelists and you who joined us tonight. It was great discussions, and we all learned from everything. So I really thank the panelists for sharing their personal time with us. So we created some Word document with links to some of the resources that are available. Some free lectures available on YouTube from ACR, RSNA, and other societies about job search and career planning. This link is open, so if you know other resources, please add to that. It's so we can share with other trainees and everyone. Use that. And for our future events, then the closest one is the upcoming HCR meeting, which is going to be in DC. It's free for trainees, and it's you can attend in person or virtual. and there is a specific session for trainees on Saturday. So please check it out. And if you're interested, it would be good to have you participate in it. And there are elections for National ACR Executive Council that you can participate and vote. So thank you again for joining us. If you can have next slide. Thank you for joining us tonight. Please keep in touch, and we would be happy to have you on our future events and be in touch with you. Thank you. Have a good night.